Welcome, everyone, to this month's Intentional Success webinar series. We're going to be talking about intentional budgeting and your 2019 fiscal plan. I'm Tom Stimson, your host. I appreciate you being here. If you don't know me, I've been around for a long time. You can learn more about me at trstimson.com. That means you were drugged to this webinar by a coworker. I thank that coworker for doing that. That's how we network. That's how we grow our base. That's how we get more people talking about this stuff, is when you bring people into the fold, into the community, and let them know that there's another way of looking at business, and it's not all just about gear and AV. Before we get too far along, I do need to acknowledge our Jumpstart Workshop sponsors. We have our final Jumpstart Workshop of the year next week. Oddly enough, registration closes tonight, and if you're one of those desperate folks who waits to the absolute last minute to do something, this would be that time. Stop what you're doing, go register right now. But AV Franklin, Higher Track, Lasso Flex, Square AV, and Avixa, and a number of new sponsors who have signed on since we put this together. We're going to have a great turnout next week. This is probably going to be our largest attendee group ever. We're right on the edge of beating the operations guys out in March. So way to go, management. We'll be giving you more feedback on that in Intentional Success newsletters to come. So let's talk about why we're having this particular webinar. Why are we talking about budgeting? Why are we talking about the 2019 fiscal plan? It is October or November after all, so this is the time to be doing it. Actually, 3 months ago is the time to be doing it. But why this webinar? You know, you've heard me say it 100 times, and I'm going to say it again. You make a plan so you can change it. The whole point of having a fiscal budget is to have a plan so that you know when you're off course, when you're off track. And I put the added caveat in there that if you make a plan to make money and you keep track of that bottom line in your plan and you make adjustments as you go, you can also continue to make money in spite of changes. Now, what I see happen all too often is people put together a budget for the year and then they set it aside and forget about it. And then they get to the end of the year and they wonder why they didn't make any money. Well, it's because they developed a plan and a budget and a staffing budget based on their lofty projections, and they didn't hit all of those targets. And then they didn't make the adjustments to help them recoup those losses and still come out with a profit at the end of the year. Every company can be profitable at the end of the year. The only reason you're not making a profit is because you didn't plan on doing it. I know that sounds like an oversimplification, but I stand by it. It is not that hard to make money if that's what you set your mind to do. So fiscal plans are going to help you make money, and reviewing fiscal plans will help you see how your decisions are reflected in that effort to make money. So when your results change, when you see changes in your results, and we'll talk about how we review our plans later on in the webinar, then you just draw a new map. So we start with a map, surprises happen, we draw a new map. That's the way this works. But first we have to have that fiscal budget to begin with. So let's get started with that. Yes, it's going to involve spreadsheets. You're going to have to look at numbers. I'm sorry. There's nothing you can do about it. This is how it works. So here is a 5-year review of a company. They obviously have multiple lines of business. They have a retail operation, which generally means box sales, rental, which generally means box rentals, or production, which means rental with services. They have a freight budget in here because apparently they do a lot of that. They have some others, which is a little bit high in this number. And then they've got a systems line, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. And then there's corresponding cost of goods sold. So this is a rolled up budget. There's not a lot of detail here, but we can learn a little bit about this business. And then over on the right, we see 3 columns of averages. We see three-year averages from 14 through 16, 2015 through 17, 2016 through 18. And this is a great way for us to take a quick look at this company and see how they're doing. So it looks like they're growing until you get to the next 3-year average when you see that they're actually kind of flat. And if we go down to the cost of goods sold, we'll see some more information about that. But here's what I want you to take a look at right now. The gross profit of this company on the 3-year average at the beginning of this, the first 3 years on this chart, they had a 62% gross profit. Now, everybody measures gross profit differently. We can only compare this company's gross profit to their gross profit and how they record things. But notice that next year is 57.6 and the year after is 56.4. Okay, those are actually significant drops. They don't look, oh, it's 5% over 4 years, not a big deal. No, that's a huge deal, because look at the bottom line of the income for this company. We go from a 9.3% net profit to a 2% net profit. Okay, little swings in cost of goods sold means big swings in income. So shrinking gross profit, shrinking profit. Staying on the same sheet, let's take a look at a couple of things. And one of the things that's significant on this is they've introduced a new line of business called systems, and I'm assuming this is systems integration. And when they introduced it on that year in 2017, the 2016 to 2017 income stayed the same. In other words, it flattened out, even though they added $1.3 million worth of income from systems integration. Now, anybody on this call knows that systems integration is inherently less profitable as a percentage of revenue than rental and certainly production. So this company apparently decided to trade high margin rentals, medium margin production for low margin systems integration. I'm sure it was a strategic move. I'm sure it was well thought out, but apparently it wasn't well executed. And you can see how those costs lay out under cost of goods sold. And then there's corresponding changes in the SG&A, or the overhead expenses. SG&A is another term for overhead. So their operating expenses, while they dropped, and we'll talk about that in a minute, their sales costs dropped, which is very suspicious. Their admin costs went up, and interest effects. So generally, their total SG&A went down a little bit, but not in normal ways. In other words, it doesn't follow the same pattern that it had been following for the years prior. So these are the kinds of things that when we're doing our planning for next year, we need to go back and see what kind of weird things have happened recently. Now, the number I want to talk about finally before we move on is in 2016, they have an operating expense, which is probably mostly labor on a sheet like this, that jumped up dramatically. And I kind of have to wonder what happened here, because that's affecting a lot of things. Now, the total SG&A went up by almost $800,000, $900,000 that year. It's very suspicious. The admin number also jumped up $400,000. These are the kinds of things, especially prior to a volatile year like 2017, that we have to pause and say, what happened? I can't put my 2019 fiscal plan together until I understand what I've done in the past and how it's affected things. And what I typically find in this, and I had this very recently with a longtime client who called me and said, hey, they saw exactly this anomaly in their P&L and they couldn't explain it. And it didn't take very much forensics, but I look at more of these than they probably do to find out that the owner had chosen to pay himself in expenses rather than take it out as owner's draws. Now, from a tax basis, that's moot. The IRS is going to look at that the same regardless of how you choose to record it on your fiscal P&L. But the fact is, he made a non-fiscal entry onto the fiscal P&L, which is throwing all of his numbers off. Now, we could easily go back and reverse that, but the point was we needed to identify that and see if there was a change in how the company was functioning that needed to be addressed. But indeed, it was just a change in how they were recording their numbers. So that could have been fixed. So in this case, if I were looking at a company with this 5 years of history, I would go back and, if not fix this in the prior year's P&L, make a pro forma version of it here. In other words, adjust for owner decisions so that all the years are operating under the same fiscal premises. That will help me determine what my 2019 budget needs to look like. Confused? Perfect. We're right on schedule. So a lot of budgeting is about avoiding surprises. We're looking at 5 years in this company, and we have 5 imprecise years that are giving us an imprecise roll-up. And within each of those years, there are months, which are also irregular. Everything about our industry in particular is extremely irregular. So the more we can break things down and control it, the better chance we have of dictating the kind of results that we want to have. So it's not enough to understand how your year went. You also have to understand how your months went. So you want to review your results monthly, because if a month doesn't go the way that you planned, you need to make immediate adjustments. And many of my clients at first resist the urge to make an adjustment. If they don't hit their revenue target, if their expenses are higher than they expected, they kind of say, well, that was just 1 month. Let's wait and see what the next month brings. And no, you need to understand why you were off on your fiscal budget. Because if you were off on this month, then all the months are wrong. And the sooner you figure out what you estimated incorrectly or what you executed poorly, the better chance you have of salvaging the year. Now, do I take it further and look at things week by week? No, I'm not going to recommend that. A month is more than enough time to see a pattern and understand what's going on. The next thing you have to do is you actually have to believe in the results. And I know that believing in facts and numbers and math and science is not very popular right now. This is one of those times where you need to believe it. The math does not lie. Look at your numbers. Your numbers are telling you a story. Understand what that story is. And then work on managing the outcomes. If the numbers aren't lying, then we can look at the things that generate the numbers and know what it is that we have to affect. If overtime is throwing off your gross profit, then look at the causes of overtime and make those adjustments. Manage a better outcome. Other times you have to adjust the budget. Sometimes our budgeting is wrong. So if we find out that our budgeting is wrong and there's no adjustments we can make, for instance, in the overtime example, then adjust your budget for the rest of the year. In doing so, we often find that after 2 or 3 months of the fiscal year, we've made all of our adjustments, we found out where our assumptions were wrong, and we frittered away all the net profit because we didn't make any sacrifices in order to preserve the net profit for the year. We simply corrected our mistakes by using the profit we had in our plan to subsidize those mistakes. We have to learn how to sacrifice optional expenses. And this is very difficult for entrepreneurial companies in particular. You're growing, you're making lots of changes, you have a vision, you don't want to compromise on anything. However, a lot of those things are quite optional. So this is the difficult conversations I often have to have with owners about where they need to let go of some things, reconsider their personal compensation, make a decision about whether or not the company needs to move to a nicer building, all that kind of thing. I've got a question up there, and this is a great question, so I'll bring it up right now. Do you recommend rolling up the whole company or dividing by regional offices if you have them? No, definitely we want to do by income units or profit centers. So companies that have regional offices may or may not be regional profit centers. If you run a depot model for your business and the regional offices are depots for the mothership, then they're not really an individual profit center. They're just an extension of your logistics. However, if they are standalone profit centers, then I'm going to run a P&L for those, and all of those P&Ls will become lines in that business. And the example we were looking at before, that company was using their retail operation as a profit center, their rental operation as profit center, production as a profit center, SI as a profit center. So each one of those would actually have their own individual P&L. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Good question. Now, the elephant in the room about this budgeting thing is forecasting revenue. And last month's webinar was supposed to be about forecasting revenue. So I've incorporated it in here. Unfortunately, I had to cancel last month's webinar for some personal reasons, which have since been resolved. So let's talk about forecasting revenue. And this will add on to my answer to the question from a minute ago. You have multiple types of revenue inside of your business. Some of the revenue types could be a business in and of itself. Okay, you may have a line of business like I just spoke about. A revenue type will generate a unique gross profit. In other words, I can separate the specific costs associated with it from your other lines of business. It doesn't mean that there aren't shared costs of goods sold, okay, which is an economy of scale, but there are unique costs of goods sold with it. And you often can have a specific overhead associated with it. For instance, in the case of a branch office that operates as a standalone business, there are overhead costs like rent and management that would be associated with that line of business. And then there's overhead expenses for the entire company that all the departments end up sharing in. So I'm going to take one particular type of business and break it down for you, and then you can extrapolate that for your other lines of business. Many of the folks on the call here are in the live event production business. You're in what we call the production rental, production services business. You're probably not doing creative. In this model, we're talking about a company that just does the event production rental. We got crews, we got equipment, we got logistics, we do travel, we ship people and gear around the country. We probably have a rental business, local business, and we have a local rental business as well. We're not doing any creative or any other soft services or design, which would be another line of business. A typical live event production company is going to have three types of business. They're going to have what I call the recurring seasonal business. This is the stuff you can kind of count on every year. This is your association meetings that come back year after year, your corporate clients who have regular annual meetings and events. This is the stuff you can kind of count on. Typically, it's somewhere between, a third to 2/3 of the total revenue for most of the companies that I deal with. You also have some transactional business or pickup business, as I like to call it, which can be the day-to-day rentals. It can be the small orders that come in during the month. In other words, you can't really predict them. You know that on a given month, you're going to have X amount of pickup business, but you don't exactly know where that business is going to come from. When you get busy, you have less capacity for pickup business. So pickup business is affected by how busy you are overall. And when you're less busy, you're more likely to take some of these jobs and projects. You'll be more aggressive on pricing, and that business will go up. And then you have one-time projects. And it's very important in my methods to separate the one-time projects because these are outliers. They really throw off our numbers. We often want to immediately consider them recurring seasonal business. We do this one big project for a corporation, and we hope that they'll do it again next year. But we have to look at the actual project and what the customers really like. Many of these are one-offs. They're outliers. They're going to temporarily affect our business, but then we're going to go back to a normal business cycle. We can predict some one-offs. As a matter of fact, we can predict a lot of one-off projects, but we can't count on them the next year. So if I'm going to do a revenue forecast, the first thing I want to do is I want to start with a baseline history. And here's an overly simplified example of 3 years of a production rental company. Here's their recurring seasonal business per month, their transactional business per month, and their one-time projects per month. And obviously, one-time projects are sparse. They don't happen every month. They're not as frequent. The transactional business is kind of seasonal. If I put much detail in this, you would see more seasonality. And then the recurring business is generally the bread and butter. This is probably what the company hangs its hat on. And the one-time projects look a lot like the recurring business, except that we don't have any security in believing that they're going to happen again. Now, what we're looking at in a chart like that is patterns. We want to look at our busy and slow months and find out if they're consistent, find out if they're in scale. Now, I have hundreds of P&Ls on my computer here. I've looked at many companies, and 90% of you are extremely seasonal. You have 6 busy months and 6 slow months, right? Which is a challenging position to be in. But I do have some clients out there who basically have 11 busy months. But that doesn't mean they don't have patterns, because the variance between a busy and a slow month may only be 20% revenue. But they will still look at some months as busy and some as slow. If you don't have a pattern, then that's a pattern. I'll often see this in startup or rather unfocused companies. If you haven't committed to a line of business, if you tend to take whatever comes your way, if you don't have a great outbound sales effort, or if you're just simply a new company, you're going to lack a pattern. And then I also want to look at the pattern of the company in the whole. That's why I like to at least look at a 3-year schedule before I start doing a forecast. I want to see, is the company growing? Are they flat, or are they shrinking? So we'll take that history into account, and then we'll look at some of the things that tells us about the particular chart. So what I've got highlighted in yellow here are some months where the month that they had a one-off piece of business and the month after. So this is something I see quite often. So this particular company in August of 2016 had a one-time project that was $300,000. It completely threw off the rest of their business. It wiped their it cut their transactional business in half. It cut their recurring seasonal business in half, probably because it used up so much of the company's capacity. As a result, the net revenue for that month was actually less than a normal month. And because they had neglected their pipeline while they were sucked into this one-time project, the following month was also soft. So this is the danger on building a business on what I call windfall projects, going after the big jobs, the big finish, those big numbers, and you feel great about, oh, we just got $1 million job, but you're a $4 million company. I had a conversation with a client just last week who was bidding on a job that was literally half their revenue in a normal year. And I gave them the best advice I could, but I also told them I really hope they don't get it because it's going to have such a huge impact on the rest of the year. They don't have the infrastructure to maintain the one-time project as well as their recurring business. So in 2017, the same thing happened to this company again. In 2018, they had a couple of months with windfalls running back to back. So the net of that is they end up doing pretty well. So we don't know what's going to happen, but we can see what the pattern is, and that's going to affect how we plan for the coming year. So I'm going to go over 3 methods of forecasting revenue. The first method we're going to talk about is the historical method, and each method has an application, and there's an application for all 3 together. When revenue is volatile, which is basically our industry, all of us deal with a volatile revenue history. Okay, method A is very helpful. It's a historical method. So we want to base our forecast based on our history, assuming there aren't many changes. Okay, there's not a lot of reasons to change what's happened historically. If I typically have a $1.8 million February, I can expect a $1.8 million February going forward. We want to make sure that our forecasts are somewhat realistic. In other words, considering the capacity. I had one client who said, hey, our February went from 900 to 1.5 million to 1.9 million. So this year, that means it'll be 2.7, except their capacity was 2 million. So let's think about this. You don't really have the capacity for that big of a jump. So we can't just draw a straight line. We have to consider all the factors that go in on that. So that was not only not realistic, it wasn't really desirable. Now, sometimes we have history that tells us we're going to be flat, and that also is not desirable. So when we come up with a flat forecast, then I'm going to start asking the questions about where do we need to put more effort? Are we going to settle for flat? Is there a strategic reason to be flat? Are we going to be much more profitable if we're flat? Now, in other words, what are we working on that year? Sometimes flat is a good thing. Flat revenue is a good thing. But oftentimes it isn't. It's actually the result of poor planning. Now, I've got a baseline that I've established based on history, but now I have to apply growth factors. So an improper application of a growth factor was the February example I just gave you. Just kind of drawing the curve, the trend curve on a couple of years. That's not a growth factor. I start with economic growth. This is the macro growth. How's the economy doing? How will it affect revenue? The economy is growing at 6%. I should probably build a budget based on 6% growth because I'm part of that economy. Now, my local economy may not be growing at the same rate the national economy is, and you have to factor that into your growth, your economic growth or potential economic growth. How much of your business is driven by local factors versus national factors versus international factors? And then there's micro changes, microeconomics, and that generally has to do with pricing and market demands or changes to pricing. So sometimes micro changes are things that I do myself. If I go through my pricing schedule and I reprice everything and I'm generally increasing prices, that should affect my growth. That should add growth to me organically. Sometimes the market is changing things. Most of my stories are a little out of date, but I will tell you a 1990s story is that we would have market changes based on new video projectors. And if a new video projector, back then a video projector was probably an $80,000 to $100,000 investment for a big LCD projector, something that was really super bright, like 3,000 lumens, and needed $6,000, $8,000 lenses to go with it. If one of those projectors suddenly became obsolete because of another projector, that rental price could be cut in half in just a matter of months. And if that is the basis of my inventory, then that's going to affect my growth for the coming year. And then there's the wild card, and that's your effort. What are you going to do that's going to affect your revenue next year? Are you bringing in new sales leadership? Are you adding a salesperson? Did you win over a major account that's going to bring recurring revenue? Are you having a concerted marketing effort? What are the things that you're going to do that will affect revenue? Are you opening a new office with a large local business? So these are all things that we have to add on top of that historical growth. And then the next thing we have to consider is timing of these changes. So just because I'm going to open a new office, unless I'm opening it January 1, even if I do open it January 1, I may not see that revenue for 6 months. So I want to make sure that I put those changes in the calendar correctly. Okay. Marketing plans, hiring sales staff, all of these things have a lag time before you start seeing results. And then you also have to look at when you're going to evaluate your predictions. Let's take that new office example. If I put in a new office and I forecasted, 90 days to start seeing revenue, and another 90 days for that revenue to actually support the P&L. In other words, for the office to go into the black, into the red. And I'm not hitting those marks. When am I going to make adjustments? When am I going to evaluate how well that business is doing? How much time can I give it? And if I'm willing to give the office 6 months, then I should put that into the budget rather than predicting an outcome in 90 days. Does that make sense? So look at when you're going to evaluate and build your budget off of what you're willing to accept on that. If you're unsure, in general, I will tell you to hedge a little bit and be conservative on your numbers. Now, method B, if method A is really about your historical and extrapolating history, applying some real-time changes to it to predict the future. Method B is more about drilling down into your sales pipeline. And let's take a look at your revenue types. So each of your revenue types, and in our example of the production rental company, recurring seasonal, transactional pickup, one-time projects, the quality of the revenue is different for each of these. So if your ideal type of revenue is the production rentals, and that is very seasonal, obviously that's probably where you want to put most of your efforts. That's where you want to put more of your energy, more of your resources to grow, because that's your best return. If your transactional pickup business is the highest volume, then again, what are we going to do to maximize it? That's where we need to put our energy. It's very rare that one-time projects are ideal revenue. One-time projects are generally strategic revenue. In other words, they help move you forward into a market area where you want to have presence and see some results. But most often they're really just windfalls. So it's very rarely your ideal type of revenue. I have worked with companies who have mistakenly taken any one of these incorrectly. I've got examples of companies that really relied on one-time projects to build their entire business. They were so uncertain about, they had no recurring business really at all, so everything was based on windfalls. Let me tell you, it does not take long for your company to be in dire straits trying to survive windfall to windfall. I have had another company who thought it really loved its recurring seasonal business, but its transactional business was where it made all its money. And they let that business go fallow and put all their energy into the wrong line of business. So there's some important decisions that you need to make about these revenues and where you want to put your energy and where you want to rely upon your future income. Now, I can go back and compare some of this to history. So I take a look at these business lines and see if that's realistic. For instance, my client who wanted to do seasonal business, basically they wanted to do production rental, even though rental was their best line of business. Their budget would not have held up against their history. Their history showed how well they did in rental. And they denied their history and went with their emotional choice of what they wanted to have without making any provisions for accomplishing it. So we want to make sure that we're actually being realistic about this and saying, do we have the talent and resources to grow that revenue or the revenue that we choose to grow? And then, of course, is it desirable? Would a diverse revenue stream be better? Do I want to put all my eggs in one basket, or do I need to have several baskets going at once? Transactional work is great for filling in the gaps. Many of my clients who have tried to drop out transactional work, and I've done it myself in my career, we dropped out of transactional work. It was the right decision, but we had to do the things to fill in that gap. In other words, we had to put greater effort to fill in our calendar with other projects. And then windfall projects, very often they hamper future sales. You're completely tied on that. It consumes your business. You don't make any progress in other areas. Sometimes you can leave windfall projects out of, or one-off projects out of your forecast and see if you don't actually do better. And then growth factors still matter. So even though I'm basing my forecast on the types of revenue that I'm used to having, I do have to apply the growth factors. We've got the economy affecting us, we have pricing changes, and then we have that really important wild card of effort. Where are you going to put your effort? Your results should be intentional. Too often, all we do is finish the year, look back and say, oh, that was good, or oh, that was bad. When we're putting together our budget for the next year, we need to declare an intentional outcome and then take the steps to actually achieve it. If you're not willing to take those steps, then you're going to run a very reactive company, and the best you can hope for is a flat year, or hopefully not losing too much more money than you lost the year before. Now, timing on revenue type also is a matter. If you put in a marketing plan, new sales staff, you change prices, that's going to affect your numbers. There's other things that will affect your overall fiscal plan besides revenue. We'll talk about that, how the expense side also affects timing. And then when are you going to evaluate? So now, method C. Of course, there's always three methods, right? This is the zero-based budgeting method. This is particularly valuable for young companies and startup companies, people with extremely volatile futures. So we're going to develop our forecast from our sales pipeline in zero base. In other words, we're going to look at everything that we know about and put a factor to it. And if we don't know about it, we can't do much with it. That's how zero-based budgeting works. So you have to justify every bit of projected revenue. That doesn't mean it has to be a known job. You can use your history to forecast a sales pipeline, but you have to justify why it's going to continue to exist. So every stage of your sales funnel has a revenue value, and the best technique for smaller young companies is to do this kind of sales pipeline. The other time I use this kind of budgeting is if I'm in a cash management crisis. If I'm having a short-term cash problem, I'm going to develop my forecast from the sales pipeline and not trust my fiscal budget. It's a level of detail that's going to be a little bit more reliable. So here's a very simplified version of what it looks like. So what is it now? It's the end of November. We're looking at January. The company has these jobs on the books. It knows about job A. It's a recurring job. We know exactly what the number is going to be. Nothing really changes. We're very confident about how it's going to come in. We've got 3 RFPs out. One we're not too thrilled about, but the other 2 we feel one or the other might happen. Okay. We have a one-off job. We have a windfall job that's confirmed. Matter of fact, we think it's going to grow a little bit, so we've added a number to it. Okay. We know that we typically have $15,000 worth of recurring revenue that every month. And we also have about $10,000 of transactional revenue. And then there's another recurring revenue line of pickup. So it is in January, between January 1 and January 31st, this company typically does another $30,000 worth of events and another $10,000 worth of rentals. That's basically what that's saying. And how do we feel about that? We're going to pick up 2 more events and a bunch of rental orders. So here's my forecast for the month factored. Okay, so this is a zero-based budget. Now, an owner or a sales manager may look at that and say, well, we did $400,000 last year. We need to have a $400,000 budget. Well, what good does that do you if you don't know where that revenue is coming from? Now you're just wishing for revenue. Okay? If you're a startup, you can't afford to add the overhead and the personnel and the equipment to support a $400,000 a month when all you have your eyes on is $280,000. Well, that's the point of zero-based budgeting. Now, what method should I use? You've all heard my, biggest business progress descriptions of beta companies, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 companies. If you're a beta to 1.0 company, methods B and C are probably where you'll spend your time. A 1.0 company is probably going to use a combination of both. I'm going to do some zero-based short-term budgeting, but I'm really going to be looking about my revenue types over time. So I'll build my fiscal budget on revenue types, but I will update it probably on a rolling 30 or 60 days basis using zero-based budgeting. If I'm a more mature company, 1.0 to 2.0, I'm going to use a little bit of methods A and B. I'll probably build my fiscal budget on method A. I'll look at my historical. It's very predictive. But then I'm going to optimize that forecast based on revenue types. Okay. If I'm a 3.0 company, I'm going to use all 3 methodologies. And I can combine all those methodologies. And I'm going to look at them all 3 ways constantly and do very, very frequent updates. As a 3.0 company, I probably updated fiscal budget, at least a revenue forecast, if not bi-weekly, certainly every month. There was a period of time where I was doing it every single week, and we were using all of the methodologies. So you have a long-term approach, you have a short-term approach, and you have the immediate approach. Long-term is method A, short-term is B, immediate is C. So depending on how important the information is and how closely you want to look at it, that's what you're going to choose. Now, this webinar is really about fiscal budgeting. So let's talk about forecasting for fiscal budgets. So you go through the exercises of predicting your revenue. And if you know what your revenue is going to be, then you should know what your cost of goods sold is going to be. Because cost of goods sold is based on a percentage of revenue. You have history. You're going to be fairly consistent about it. Okay. The fact that one job may be highly profitable and the job next week is not as profitable is moot. On the average, you have a standard cost of goods sold that you will typically achieve for a given volume of month, and you can count on it. Okay. If you try and engineer little peaks and valleys based on individual jobs, then basically you're denying the efficacy of your math. Okay. So when I budget, I'm going to shoot high, or I'm going to shoot low, or I'm going to shoot in the middle. Right? Either I'm going to be aggressive, or I'm going to hedge, or I'm going to be flat. There are times to do each one, and I've done them all. Here are my criteria for shooting high. I put a higher budget out there. I will put a more positive spin on the information that's in front of me when there are clear demand growth indicators. In other words, I'm seeing more RFPs coming through. I'm seeing longer lead times. I'm seeing bigger budgets. That's when to shoot high. But I also need to have an excess capacity in my sales team. I have to have excess capacity in operations, and I have to have resources. In other words, I have to have product on the shelf. I need to have suppliers that are standing by and ready to help me. I also need to have working capital. In other words, I need to be able to fund this, because if I get a windfall job, just because I have sales, operations, and resource capacity, I don't have the cash to pay for everything. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to start shorting my vendors. My supply chain is going to lose confidence in me, and the next month is going to be really ugly. And then the other time to shoot high is the other factor that you have to have is a lot of outsourcing. You need a deep bench. Okay? Don't shoot high if you only have 3 freelancers that you use and you have 1 sub-rental supplier that you max out all the time. You can't shoot high. Your capacity is capped. Even if you have all these other things, if you can't outsource, then you can't sell beyond your capacity. Now, likewise, when do you shoot low? Okay. Timing. When the projects that you know deliver in the same time window. You know what a busy month is. A busy month is when all the jobs line up on the same week. The best revenue month I ever had, all the jobs happened at some same 10-day period. And not only did it just about kill us, we didn't make any money. So we want to shoot low when we know that projects are going to stack up, because it's going to make it more difficult to sell an additional project. When the factors that affect your forecast are more uncertain, customers aren't calling back, if budgets are not being shared or not clear, we're not getting, we're used to hearing about projects 3 months out. In other words, my lead time starts to shrink. These are uncertain factors. So I want to start forecasting a little bit more low. If you have a reduction in resources during a time period, here's the perfect example of a client in Sao Paulo, Brazil, who had offices in Rio de Janeiro, and they had World Cup and the Olympics coming up. And they had to make a choice about whether they were going to support those mega windfall events or they're going to support their regular business. They were going to have a huge reduction in resources. All of their suppliers are going to be tied up doing the Olympics and the World Cup. So how are they going to run their business? So they had to basically dial their forecast back. And the other time to shoot low is anytime your tolerance for risk is compromised. And I can't overemphasize this. As entrepreneurs, we're taking a risk. And if our tolerance is risk is low, and it could be for completely personal reasons that your tolerance for risk is low, then shoot low. Okay? Don't put pressure on yourself if you feel that it's going to be very, very risky. All right. I got a question here I want to pause for. Says it's not really a budget question, but what's the best way to approach a windfall opportunity? Someone is going to get the work because the client has a need. Should we go in with a high bid so if we win it, we'll overcome any negative impact? That's a good option. Do we low bid and hope to lose? Do we politely walk away? The latter might close the doors to future work that exists with a potential customer. All right, so this is the classic windfall question. It's like, well, it's an opportunity. If I don't take it, I won't get this revenue. Somebody else will get it. It'll close the door on that client. These are all the right questions, and there's no answer. It really depends on what the strategy of your business is. So I would go back to look at your fiscal budget. Did you plan in your fiscal budget for large windfalls? If you did, then you better pursue it. If you didn't plan for windfalls, if you're not a windfall company, then I recommend don't pursue it. It's like the example I gave a little while ago. My client who had coaching client who was bidding on a job that was half their year. Okay, that was a huge windfall, and they felt like they needed to be involved with it. The consultant that was involved was pulling for them and all that kind of stuff. And they felt they could be competitive, but the fact of the matter is they had no business in that space. Okay? So look at your business model, because that determines whether or not you should go after it. I hope that answered your question, because that was a how long is a piece of string question. But it really depends on what your plan is, what your tolerance for risk is, and what you have set your company up to do. Will it be the job that wipes out the current and the following month for you? And what is the net gain if that happens? There's plenty of business out there, folks. Boy, you know, if you ever want a dose of reality, get out of your bubble, get out of your office, start talking to some other folks. There is so much business out there. I mean, just in the live event production business in North America, you know, there's $10 billion worth of business out there. If you're a $5 million, $10 million, $20 million company, what's $1 million job? And it's a drop in the bucket. It's a rounding error in the entire marketplace. Wait for the windfall that works for you. Wait for the windfall that fits into your plan, and work harder on building your pipeline so you get more of the kind of jobs that you want, instead of having to get excited about reacting to a windfall opportunity, which is always a little bit scary from my point of view. Some general considerations when you're doing your fiscal budgeting: consistent revenue recognition protocols. What this simply means is generally acceptable accounting principles say that you recognize revenue in the month in which it occurred. And for production rental folks, most of the time that means the day the job ends. We recognize the revenue when the job is over. You can choose to recognize revenue when the job starts. That is acceptable. I will tell you, it doesn't work well. It's an accounting nightmare. So just be consistent, always use the same revenue recognition, and don't book that windfall job in February when it ends on March 1st, because that's a March job. Be aware that an increase in one revenue stream is going to affect the capacity of others. I think I've said that 3 different ways. Hopefully you'll be more aware of that. And the type of quality of revenue affects gross profit. That's this month's webinar. We've already talked about this. If you add systems integration at 35 points margin, and it cuts into your production rental at 50 points and your rental at 75 points, that's a quality of revenue gross profit calculation. If you're a smaller company, and what is a smaller company, Tom? I would say if you're less than the $4 million in revenue, or you have the maturity of a smaller company, typically you're not going to have very much sales pipeline. Therefore, your forecast is going to be extremely uncertain. So be much more careful about forecasting. The trigger point for windfall status is also much lower. I remember when the company was rapidly growing in the 90s, you know, we thought a $50,000 job was huge, you know, and a $150,000 job was a windfall. By the time I left in 2006, a $150,000 job often didn't hit my radar as general manager. As you grow, big is going to take on different connotations. And in a smaller company, a short-term success, having a good month, typically won't change your trajectory. Okay, you're not setting a pattern, you're not creating a trend. And if you're a small company, we want to get excited, think, hey, we finally made it, we're finally having success because we had a good month. But the fact is that's not a trend. So don't let that optimism, and bless you for having it, but don't let that optimism get into your fiscal forecast and undermine you. So the final thing I want to talk about here is updating your forecast. So this is an ongoing activity. I really do mean this, and I know it's difficult for people to get their head around the fact that you're supposed to maintain this year round. You know, you put the budget together and then you dive back into doing jobs and you forget about this stuff, and you don't make time for those meetings. You don't make time for budget reviews. We think it's a waste of time. And you know what? Companies who have been stagnant for a long, long time use that excuse very well. It's a waste of time. If you look at the companies that are really growing, that are prospering, that are making a difference, that are enjoying the life that you wish you had, I guarantee you they're looking at budgets, they're reviewing their numbers, they're making time for managing their business. One of these things you have to do is update your budgets. Okay, look at this stuff. I look at particularly revenue forecasts. I look at maybe biweekly, probably no less than monthly. Look as far ahead as new data allows. Maybe only a couple of weeks if you're a small company or a young company. You may be 3 to 6 months in a larger firm. If you're in the association type business, you have a longer lead time. You're looking. You may be able to look 12 months out and see what's going on. Always look for opportunities to adjust your tactics. So short and long range pricing, the dynamic pricing that I keep harping on. If you start seeing softness in your sales numbers and you have open RFPs in your pipeline, put some closing pressure on them. And it might be pricing that does it. And then always recast your probabilities. If you're doing the kind of forecast that is the zero-based budgeting, constantly update the probabilities of that job closing. Keep track of those numbers. There was a particularly dire point in my former company's history where, through no fault of our own, but part of the parent company we were with at that time was having a huge cash management crunch. And I was actually updating sales and cash forecasts almost daily. So that made a huge difference. It gave me a lot of insight into how all of this works, and it made me a great advocate for this, because what I found was that with practice, we got very, very good at that. And we got very good at forecasting budgets, forecasting revenue, and hitting our numbers. And that meant that if we were confident in our ability to budget and hit those numbers, we were more confident in the potential of putting effort into a particular area to try and drive a result. So, companies will say, well, I don't want to invest in marketing because I don't know what the return will be. If you're good at forecasting, okay, then it's really easy to check what your results on marketing are. If you're bad at forecasting, marketing may look like you're just, throwing seeds in the wind. It doesn't mean it won't work, but you have no way of measuring it. So we'll have some time for questions. I got a couple of housekeeping notes I want to give you, and I have some final thoughts I want to send you home with on all of this. I know this is a complex subject. I see there's a couple more questions, but please type in some more questions and I will come back to that. Next month's webinar will be, it'll be fun, let me tell you. It's going to be the year in the review, the year ahead. This will be a lot of free form. I just wrote a piece for next month's AB Matters, the Small Business Matters article, talking about how you predict trends for the coming year. And I've got some pretty interesting predictions for 2019. And we'll certainly talk about that in next month's webinar and what that all means. So we'll look at what we've learned this year and what we can expect next year. And we'll close out the year with a bang. So I hope you'll register for that. We've got a Jumpstart workshop next week. There's still a couple seats left if you want to register today. I will tell you, I had somebody register last night, somebody register this morning, and we'll take another one. So come on. And be sure you're on my mailing list. If you're just joining this because you got pulled into the conference room or you saw the free pizza for the lunch and learn, go to my website, click on download your free ebook, and I'll send you my newsletter. Well, I'll send you a copy of the ebook, and you'll get my Monday morning intentional success newsletter. Great blogs every week. Great, if I do say so myself, fun stuff. And we'll keep you informed about how to be better at working on your business. And then the invitation is always open to everyone. If you want to have a conversation with me, just let me know. I do enjoy these things. I love getting invitations that come from my website, people who can go to my calendar and pick out a time that works for them and schedule a call. These are the kind of highlights of my week. So please feel free to do that. I'll answer any question you have. talk to you about doing business together, or just give you free advice. It's part of why I do this. It's my way of giving back. So don't hesitate to use that. I do mean that sincerely. I'd love to talk to you. So once again, thank all of our sponsors. If you're interested in being a sponsor for next year, well, reach out. I'd be happy to have my team talk to you. We've got some great opportunities up ahead. So make some room for some final questions here. And I can tell it's the week after a holiday. They're moving slow. So question is, hey, Tom, if I use a zero-based budgeting exclusively, I won't have any revenue after next month. Should I shut down my business? Aha. Okay, yeah. All right. Yeah, I have to say I was expecting that question. No, that doesn't mean you shut down your business. You do have a historical context of what you do, and your business is also an investment in the future. You're going to keep the doors open in anticipation of business. Now, there will come a point in time where, and this does happen, where you find out that you can't sustain it. Your tolerance for risk goes away, and you have to let go of that. But no, just because you don't have business immediately in March of next year doesn't mean that you won't be in business in March of next year. If you want to make yourself feel better, go back and look at last year and find out how late March started. How late were the bids and the RFPs that you got out for the March, and that will help you feel better about that. That's part of your cycle. So for some of us, having confidence in our fiscal or our revenue budget 3 months out is normal. For some of us, 6 months out. For some of us, it's 6 weeks or 6 days. So great, thank you, great question. Another question is, how is forecasting, also known as educated guessing? Yeah, thanks, Matt. How is forecasting a way to check if marketing is working? That's a great question. If I had left in the slide I had with the marketing funnel, you know, the inverted funnel with leads at the top and sales at the bottom, each level in that funnel has a value. You know, I can have 1,000 leads, which gives me 100 prospects, which gives me 10 opportunities, which yields 3 jobs. That's a close rate of 30%. Okay. So if my marketing is working, those numbers are going to move, and they're going to move from the top down. So if I'm moving from, 1,000 leads and 150 prospects to 15 or 18 opportunities, okay, if I even if I leave my close rate at 30%, I just double the number of jobs I have. So that's how you look to see if your marketing is working. Okay, do you have more people that you're having conversations with? So that's a good question. Yes, do you also forecast profit each month? Yes, in a fiscal budget, you forecast profit each month. Now, keep in mind that profit on a monthly basis is a pretty much meaningless number. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to manage profit for the year. The way we keep score in business is on a 12-month calendar. Okay. Now, we can keep score in our career, and as long as the last day we're in business, we make $10 million, we can say we won. But we're trying to build that up as we go. So we're trying to add profit every year to the business, to the shareholders' value every year. But yes, do I forecast profit each month? Yes, I do. Do I recognize that a small change in 1 month may affect the profit for that month, but actually improve the profit for another month? Okay. So when it comes to looking at the company's profit, I'm always going to look at a trailing 12 months. But 1 month's change in profit might be an indicator that there's something I need to manage. Good answer. And one last question, because we're out of time here. Crystal ball for 2019, should we expect our industry and the economy to stay as strong as it's been over the past few years? That's a great segue to say, hey, sign up for next month's webinar and let's talk about it. Things could change by then, you know what I mean? So thank you, everyone. If I see one more question on here, I'll send you a note personally. Thanks for coming today. The recording will be up tomorrow. I appreciate everybody being here. It's been awesome. And for all you folks coming to Jumpstart Workshop, I will see you next week in Dallas. Take care, everybody.